In this episode of the podcast, I'm going to teach you exactly how to develop those stubborn muscle groups that you constantly train in the gym. And despite your hard work and efforts, feel like they never seem to grow. But with this simple system and formula I'm going to teach you in today's episode, you'll know exactly how to grow those stubborn body parts, and you will start seeing results faster than you can believe. Welcome to the Choose Hard podcast. I am your host, Cody McBroom. I am a father, husband, coach, and entrepreneur, and the founder of TailoredCoachingMethod, a world-renowned online coaching company that helps average people achieve above-average physiques and live above-average lives. Today, we are diving into stubborn body parts. I'm going to teach you exactly how to develop those stubborn muscle groups that you feel like you are busting your ass with week after week after week, yet you don't seem to see any growth. And you are probably confused and frustrated. And there's honestly just literally 4 things you need to understand. And I'm going to cover those today. This should be a really straightforward podcast that gives you something that you can grab and really literally put on paper your program that you are using and run with and see results pretty quickly. Now, muscle growth takes time. I'm not going to get into the science of muscle development, but building new muscle tissue takes time. However, if you are doing the right things, you should see the results start to kick in within a matter of weeks. And so I truly believe that if you just listen to the 4 simple things I'm going to give you today and you go apply them in the gym as soon as possible, I honestly believe you are going to see dramatic results rather quickly. Okay, so the first thing when we are talking about building stubborn body parts, step 1 in this process of picking the body part, and I guess I should start with that actually. Let's provide some context there. This is not something you want to do for numerous body parts. So when you take this information, I just want you to know, like, we are talking about stubborn muscle groups, but like for the application aspect of this information and the content I'm going to give you today, let's just consider it as a muscle group, not groups. And I say that because if you are trying to do what I'm going to talk about today with 2 or 3 body parts simultaneously, it's not going to work as well. And overall fatigue is probably going to accumulate because, as you're going to see, you have to put more effort towards one specific area of the body when using this kind of protocol. So when we are considering a specialization program, which is really what this shows you how to develop, you are targeting one body part or muscle group more than the others, which means that it should probably be lagging behind. So the other muscle groups in your body are already pretty developed, or you're advanced enough to know that you've been training for a while and you've seen some growth and development in other areas of your body, but you look at this one body part and realize that it is the stubborn body part. It is falling behind compared to the others. So now, a good example of this is I love training delts, and I'm going to use this as an example coming up. And for a while, it wasn't necessarily a stubborn body part, but it was an area that I needed to develop more because I compete in men's physique. And if you don't have big capped delts, they call them capped or 3D delts, really big round delts, it's hard to create that V taper or that X frame that you need for men's physique as a competition. So I want to have bigger delts. I didn't have small delts, I didn't have bad delts, but they weren't noticeably big enough. And so I needed to specialize in them, not because I was lagging in that body part, but because I needed to specific for my goal. Another example of this early in my training is that I did have a lagging body part, and that was my back and my lats. And so this wasn't because I had a specific goal to accomplish. Say it was a performance goal, or maybe it was a pull-up goal, like I wanted to be able to do a certain amount of pull-ups or certain amount of weight for a weighted pull-up. That would be great. And I could specialize in this body part if it was too weak for me to accomplish that goal. But really, I had small lats. I had a small back, and I didn't train it enough. And so when I hired one of my first coaches, that's what we specialized in, because it was like, you're training everything decently, but you're just missing a lot of back training, and your back is small and weak. And in fact, the group that I trained with, these group of guys that were kind of like mentors and coaches to me, literally started calling me Cody McLittleback instead of McBroom. It drove me nuts. And so I did a back specialization program using some of these strategies. And so in that case, I did have a little back literally, but I had a lagging body part that needed work. And then in the prior example, I didn't have necessarily lagging shoulders or delts, but I needed more delts in order to accomplish my competitive goals as a men's physique athlete. I didn't, need more chest. I didn't need more biceps because you don't get judged on arms as much as you do delts and lats. So I needed to specialize in that. And so I say this context because while I was training in a specialization program for my back, I wasn't specializing in any other body part. When I was doing a specialization program for my shoulders, I wasn't doing any other body part as a specialization program. I wasn't specializing or adding volume or anything in any other body part. Everything else is kind of that maintenance mode or in a balanced position. And so I wanted to say that because I know a lot of times people hear content like this, and what they'll do, and I see this all the time, is they'll go run a back, chest, and triceps specialization program, and now they got shoulder and elbow joint issues, when the reality is they did not follow the instructions properly. They did not specialize in one body part in this given program. Okay, so that being said, let's dive into it. So the first step in developing any stubborn body part is going to be train it often. So step one, train it often. An increased training frequency gives us an increased chance of seeing growth, i.e. more opportunities to simulate the growth of that muscle. Pretty simple, right? And so as you'll see, I'm going to cover these steps, and I did it in a way where they all sound very similar, and it's very it's very easy to remember. And I did that on purpose. And I'm going to take a step back and just spit them all out, since we're in the beginning of this episode, almost like a table of contents, so you can know what's coming up. You need to train it often. You need to train it different. You need to train it first, and you need to train it most. Okay? So train it often, train it different, train it first, train it most. So step one, train it often. We need to increase the frequency that we train this muscle. We need to send the signal of growth more often. We need to stress the muscle more often. So what you want to do for this and how you accomplish more frequency is pretty simple. First, add 1 to 3 exercises 2 to 4 times a week. So you need to integrate more exercises throughout the week. So instead of following a bro split where you train your shoulders once a week, or even a push-pull leg split, which really just trains the shoulders twice a week in small doses, you might want to increase that to being able to sneak in the body part itself in other periods of times, whether it's shoulders or something else. I'm using shoulders as an example for myself, but to do this, you might need to use an unconventional training split or tack on some volume to your current normal split. So let's say you're doing an upper-lower split and you want to specialize in glutes. You would go upper, lower, upper, lower. Perfect. You might want to set up your schedule to be Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. And so with this, we can go Mondays upper, Tuesdays lower, where we hit our glutes, Thursdays upper, where we're going to hit our glutes again, and then Saturdays lower, where we hit our glutes again. And the reason we set it up on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday is because this gives us a full 24-hour period between the exposures to training your glutes, and ideally even more, but some of those days it might be 72 hours. So if we go upper, lower, rest, lower, that's a big chunk of time. You have more than that 24-hour period. And so doing this helps us target the glutes more often, but that's an upper-lower split. So now you're adding glutes, which is lower body, on an upper body day. That's okay. It's unconventional. It doesn't need to be strictly abiding by the training split routine rule book, right? You can implement things that switch it up. A common split I use with women is legs, push, legs, pull. So it's 4 days a week. And what this is legs and then chest, shoulders, triceps, legs, and then glutes and back biceps. So all the pull muscles, including the glutes and the hamstrings. So we do, again, have 3 exposures to the glutes on that given week. You can also go upper, lower, push, pull, legs, or for women, I like to do lower, upper, legs, push, pull, because again, I can go lower, upper, which is going to be glutes, upper body, and then legs, glutes again, push, and then pull, and then the pull with all the back muscles, I throw glutes in there too. So now we're hitting the glutes on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or a Monday, Thursday, Saturday, or something like that. And so essentially, we're just increasing the frequency at which we expose our muscle to that. And we might want to start by doing this like, okay, I'm going to do a glute exercise 3 days a week throughout the week. Then I'm going to do 2 glute exercises 3 days a week. Then I'm going to do 3 days a week. And you can just increase the frequency. You can also do 4 on Monday, 3 on Wednesday, and 2 on Saturday. It doesn't need to be perfectly symmetrical with the numbers because we can just increase that slowly. And all you want to do is monitor your recovery to ensure your fatigue doesn't decrease the performance in other sessions that are coming up. So if I do 3 days a week of glutes, I need to make sure that increase of frequency with glute training isn't also taxing my hip flexors or my hamstrings or my lower back or anything like that. And that's kind of bleeding into my other sessions. Because if it's bleeding into your other sessions, now your overall performance and your overall total volume for the week in general starts to lower, and that's going to harm your results as a whole, okay? So step number 1, train it often, which is to increase the training frequency, so how often you hit that muscle group per week. That's step 1 in developing a stubborn body part. Step 2 is to be training it differently. And so what I mean by train it different is that we need to change up the variations we have throughout the week. So each muscle has different functions and capabilities. So in order to maximize muscle growth, we should really be varying how we hit that muscle each time we train it. And so what I mean by each muscle has different functions and capabilities, it depends on the muscle itself. But for example, the glutes, again, can do hip flexion. Hip extension would add the stretch, and hip abduction. So your glutes can extend the hips, go backwards, and that's going to shorten the muscle. You can flex the hip, which would be something like an RDL, which is more of a hamstring exercise, more of a, or if you flex the hip, you might be doing a squat. But if you take that range of motion into its fullest range of motion and you create a large stretch on the glutes when your hips are in a flex position, so your glutes are bending and stretching the muscle itself, that's going to lead to more muscle growth, because we know that overloading from a weight perspective, the stretched position of a muscle actually enhances growth more than any other portion of the range of motion. And so we also know that it does hip abduction, which is lateral flexion of the hip. So now if we kick our legs out to the side, hip abduction, good girl, bad girl machine, that's going to shorten the muscle, right? If we do it as a standing cable machine, for example, we can allow the cable to pull. If we have an ankle strap with the cable, we can allow the cable to pull our leg across our midline, and that would actually stretch the glute in that hip abduction position, and then we can laterally abduct our leg, just single leg, and now we're shortening that muscle. So we need to train it differently, because when we train it differently, we're varying the movement patterns and exercise variations by joint angle and the emphasized overload. And so what we want to do, there was a good study by my good friend Chris Barakat on the biceps that showed this. And one group did 9 sets of curls in a neutral shoulder position. One group did 3 sets of curls, and they varied the joint angle in each one. Neutral, short flexed position, and then extended position. And so we have a flex position, which would be like a spider curl or an easy bar curl on preacher curl, right? Where we have our shoulder in a flex position. It's in front. We have a neutral position, which would be like a standing hammer curl, which would be neutral or position of our shoulder. It's right to our side. And then extended would be like if we're sitting on an incline bench, or we're doing a cable curl with the cables behind our back, and it pulls our shoulders into hyperextension. When we change the joint angle of the shoulder, we put the bicep into a different position every time. Much like if you are doing a leg curl. You can do a leg curl in a lying leg curl or a seated leg curl. They also have standing or kneeling leg curl machines, but for sake of everybody understanding what I'm talking about, the 2 most common are a seated leg curl and a lying leg curl. A lying leg curl is where your hips are in an extended position. From your shoulders to your knees is a straight line, right? Your hips are extended. A seated leg curl, your hips are flexed. So we have hips extended, hips flexed. Shoulders to knees is straight in the hips extended position, a lying leg curl. And then shoulders to hip is all that we have as far as like a straight line when it comes to a seated leg curl, because you're in a seated position. So your hip flexors are shortened. Well, what this does is it puts our joint, the hip joint, in a different position. So we're going to emphasize different heads of the hamstrings, because there's multiple heads of the hamstring muscles. On top of that, we are going to place the hamstring in a greater stretched position in one of them versus the other. So when we're in a seated leg curl, we actually place the muscle under more of a stretched position because of how we are sitting. Versus a lying leg curl, we don't get a chance to stretch the hamstring as much. And what this actually leads to, based on what studies have shown comparing the 2 machine exercises, is that a seated leg curl leads to more growth. And we know that this is because all research done on overloading different positions of the range of motion, stretched or shortened, is that when we stretch a muscle under load, we build more muscle. So during a RDL, for example, a stiff leg deadlift, when we are in that big stretched position, that is the position that is going to lead to the most growth of the hamstrings. So if we are in a seated leg curl and we are creating more load over the stretch position than we are when we do a lying leg curl, because there's a less stretch happening to the hamstrings in a lying leg curl, we know that the seated leg curl is going to lead to more growth. And that's what research actually showed. So we know that we need to have different joint positions, and we know that we want to emphasize the different positions of the range of motion, the stretch or the shortening. The stretch is going to be more beneficial. So what I would say here is that when we're looking at increasing our frequency of a body part and we are changing the exercises, if we have an odd number of exercises, or even if we don't, if we have an even number, the majority of your exercises, if your goal is to build this muscle, which is what we're talking about today, most of the exercises you choose for that body part should put the muscle in a stretched position. So if I am doing if my goal is hamstrings again, or even glutes, and you're doing a lot of booty band exercises where you're just, hip abductions, glute bridges, banded hip thrusts, regular hip thrusts, you're putting the glutes in a lot of different shortened positions and ranges of motion, and you're not putting them in very many stretched positions. So you should be doing RDLs with maybe a band around your waist that pulls you into more hip flexion, so you get a deeper stretch on the glutes. You should do your hip thrust with a deficit. So you put your feet up on a deficit so you actually get into the stretch position instead of the plates just hitting the bottom. Right? You should be doing deep squats or deep leg press with a wide stance so you get a bigger stretch on the glutes. You should do high box step-ups, deficit Bulgarian split squats, or even just Bulgarian split squats with a hip emphasis. So you're sitting back into the hips instead of being super upright and letting your knee travel too far forward over the toes, which leads to more quads. Right? All of these exercises lead to a greater stretch position on the glutes. So if the goal is to build your glutes, you want to do more stretched positions. And then lastly, use different machines and resistance curves. So don't stick with dumbbells every time. Don't stick with the same machines every time. Use different resistance curves. A dumbbell, a machine, a cable, a band, they all have different resistance curves. A dumbbell is going to be heaviest in its position furthest away from the body or the midline. So on a dumbbell bench press, for example, at the top, there's less tension on my chest, obviously. At the bottom, there's more. So my dumbbell is moving away from the midline being my sternum, because I'm at the bottom, so I'm angling outwards. I'm doing shoulder abduction. My shoulders are moving away from the midline. That leads to more stretch on my chest. When I press to the top, the dumbbell's actually above my shoulder. There's no abduction going on. The muscle's not stretched. There's not much tension. It's not hard. Whereas a cable press, there's actually tension constantly because it's a nonstop resistance curve. So at the top of the movement, there's still as much tension. So even though you're shortening the muscle, you're not stretching it, you can't stop contracting it because there's constant tension. Whereas a band, it's going to be the highest at the top and the lightest at the bottom, because as you go back down, that band loses tension and that removes tension from the muscle. So the resistance curve of different machines and dumbbells changes. And so we want to vary that. Sometimes it's good to have less at the top and more at the bottom. Sometimes it's better to have a constant non-stop curve. So we don't want to just use cables. We don't want to just use free weights. We want a combination, right? We also need to be able to overload the movement, which isn't as possible with cables a lot of times. So for certain reasons, we might want free weights or even machines like the leg press and such. So point is, we need variation. And the best way to vary change your variation is to vary the movement patterns and exercise variations by joint angle and where you are emphasizing the tension and the overload. Step 3 is train it first. This one's really simple. By starting your session with that specific body part or muscle group that you're after as far as developing, you are training it with a more energy and less fatigue because you're training it in the beginning. So this leads to a greater amount of volume throughout the session and heavier loads and higher reps typically. And again, really, really obvious. If you train this muscle group first in the session, you're going to have more energy to push yourself and lift heavier and do more reps probably. So you're going to accumulate more volume. Volume is going to lead to more growth. And so how do we do this? Well, we just start our sessions with the prioritized specific muscle group. So for example, again, if I'm using the delts as an example, and I'm focused on developing my shoulders, and I'm doing let's say a push-pull legs split. So I go push-pull legs, push-pull legs. On both of those push sessions, push 1 and push 2, I might just start with overhead press instead of bench press. I might just start with lateral raises instead of chest slides. Like I'm just going to hit my shoulders before I go to chest because it's a push day. I'm going to do shoulders, chest, and then triceps. And normally I would probably suggest somebody do chest, then shoulders, then triceps because the chest movements you're going to do, you're probably going to go heavier. They're going to be more compound style lifts. The injury risk is a little bit higher. It's a bigger muscle group than your shoulders. So it makes more sense when we're just thinking of a balanced physique to do your chest before your shoulders. However, if my goal is to emphasize shoulder development, I'm going to do the shoulders first. This is going to help manage fatigue and performance throughout the session. So if I do chest first, my triceps and my front delts are a little bit more fatigued. Therefore, I'm not going to be able to lift as heavy in the shoulders. Now, on the contrary, if you do shoulders first, you're not going to lift as heavy in the chest after that. But that's okay because you're not emphasizing that. So you kind of have to take an L on the chest and just know that you're going to maintain your gains on your chest and your pecs in order to specialize and develop more the delts. So again, this is why we really want to choose a specialization program when we really need to emphasize that specific body part. And we don't mind sacrificing some of the gains on a different body part. Now, you'll ensure greater total volumes given to that muscle, obviously, because you're just going to do more, right? So you might end up doing an extra 5 or 10 pounds. You might actually squeeze out a couple extra reps. You might even have more energy to do a couple extra sets. And then also, this is a hypothetical theory because it's not always true. Sometimes it works in the opposite, but sometimes targeting your priority group first actually allows for it to be a secondary potential muscle group for other exercises. So if I do shoulders first, when I go to do chest, I might actually hit my shoulders a little bit as a secondary muscle group. Maybe I fatigue them a little bit more in terms of squeezing out some extra reps and volume. So I'm doing bench press, but now I'm actually getting some shoulder activation in there because I just trained shoulders, right? Now, sometimes this can work in your advantage for the chest. So for some people, if I actually pre-fatigue my shoulders, I'm actually going to target my chest more during the bench because my shoulders are fatigued, my chest has to take over. However, that could also lead to less load because the shoulders are a secondary mover in the bench press and they might actually help you bench press more. And so if I fatigue my shoulders and then I go bench press and I actually can't lift as heavy, even though I might feel it more in my chest, I actually do less volume because the load isn't as heavy. So this can work in two different ways. Sometimes that pre-fatigue actually allows you to stay active if you didn't overly fatigue your shoulders from doing shoulders first. Take this with a grain of salt. Again, it's hypothetical. You'll have to kind of see how it feels. But regardless, it doesn't really matter. It's just a potential benefit because ultimately, if you want to develop any one body part, you need to prioritize it first in that session when you have the most energy and the least amount of fatigue. Number 4, train it most. So the last thing is pretty simple. Mechanical tension is the key to muscle growth, and set volume, so how many sets you do per muscle group per week, is the best way to essentially track total tension placed on a muscle group based on what research shows us. This is why a lot of people say that volume is the key to muscle growth, which is kind of true. I would say volume is the key metric to track to ensure muscle growth, but mechanical tension, which is the tension actually placed on a muscle, that's the key to growth. So when we place tension on a muscle, it's forced to grow. That's how it adapts to the tension placed and the stress placed on it. That's the stimulus that creates that. However, we need to have enough of it. So it's how much total tension we have placed on a muscle group over the course of weeks and months that leads to maximal muscle growth. And so what we want to do is utilize the training split to ensure that you are training with a higher level of frequency and sets per muscle group per week and per session. Optimize frequency and sets per muscle group per session so that we optimize and maximize the total sets per muscle group per week. Ideally, you want to hit around 20 sets per muscle group per week in a specialization phase. Everybody's going to be different here of what they can recover from and tolerate, but typically we see this bell curve, and it's essentially somewhere between 10 and 20, sometimes a little bit more than 20 sets. I would say nobody's ever above 25 sets per muscle group per week. And so just for easy math, that would be like doing 10 sets of shoulders for me on push day 1 and 10 sets on push day 2, and then doing maybe 3 to 4 sets on each of the chests so that I have less on, it would be 6 to 8. So we're dropping off a little bit of the set. So maybe I go 4 sets of overhead press, 4 sets of lateral raises, and then 2 sets of like a shoulder complex just to burn out. And then I do 4 sets of dumbbell bench press and 3 sets of flies. So that's 7 sets there, 7 sets of chest on the next push day, while I'm doing 10 sets of shoulders on both those push days. So I have 20 total sets of shoulders, and then I have 14 total sets of chest. For some people, it'll be more like 15 for the specialization group and then 10. The point is if you haven't tracked your sets per muscle group per week, you probably should. That's the first thing you should do, is track how many you're doing now, because you just want to increase it from what you're doing. If you jump right to 20 and you've only ever done 10 sets per muscle group per week, you're going to overtrain, and that cumulative fatigue is going to be too great for you to adapt and recover from, and you're not going to build at all, right? So don't do that. You're going to probably injure yourself. The best thing to do is to just track your sets per muscle group per week, which can be easy because if you're following a program, just count the sets you do for each body part. Then you can go to your program and adjust it to make sure you're doing a little bit extra in each body part that you want to specialize in, or the body part you want to specialize in. Okay, so again, 20 sets is going to be the higher end, 10 sets is going to be the lower end. Typically, 10 sets is more like balanced growth or maintenance for people. And then 20 sets is specialization. So like, for example, right now I'm doing 22 sets on my lats per week. And I am doing, I want to say it's 18 sets on my shoulders. And then the rest are between 10 and 15. So I can generally follow a pretty high volume program. I train 5 to 6 days a week right now, and I'm in a muscle growth phase. So it's easy for me to add more volume. I have a lot of experience doing that, and it doesn't overtrain me. But 22 sets, it crushed, like it maximizes my threshold. My lats are crushed the first week of a program, and it gets easier. And then I usually switch exercises about 4 weeks in, and that usually starts that novelty cycle again. And I'm specializing in lats. I want to grow my lats first. That's my primary specialization group right now. My shoulders are the secondary. And again, that's why it's at like 18. So that being said, again, 20 on the high end, 10 on the low end. The point is you want to utilize your training split to maximize frequency. So how often you hit the muscle group, like we said in step 1, how often you train a muscle, and to maximize the sets per session so that your sets per week are greater. So if you're training the muscle 2 or 3 times a week, you should be maximizing how many sets you can get done in each of those sessions so that your total weekly sessions per muscle group are as high as possible. And then lastly, track your weights and use a tonnage formula to record your total sets. And this is going to be the sets times reps times load. And you can just progress your tonnage per exercise weekly. So this is a cool feature that we added in the Tailored Trainer for this exact reason, because I know if I do 3 times 10 reps times 100 pounds, that is 3,000 total pounds of tonnage. And so if I have 3,000 pounds of tonnage, that means that next week I just got to do 3,200, right? I can just add a rep. I can add 5 pounds, and it does quite a bit, believe it or not, because you're doing 10 reps of 5 extra pounds, 10 times 5 times 3 sets. It's a lot. It adds up to be a lot. And when we're just literally adding a single rep or a single 5 pounds, it's hard for us to see how this is going to lead to a lot of muscle growth. But that's a lot of tonnage. And so that volume that is accumulating by tonnage, sets times reps times load, that leads to a lot of muscle growth. And it's one of the best ways to track your progress via volume to ensure muscle growth. If you do that and you are increasing that total tonnage week after week, it's golden. And so in the app, what you'll see if you check out the Tailored Trainer and you go to thetailoredtrainer.com, you can try it out for free and test the programs. If you're doing a lat pull down, for example, and last week you did 200 pounds on a lat pull down for 4 sets of 8, it's going to show you your total tonnage. It's highlighted in turquoise. It's going to show you your total tonnage at the top of the screen. And it's really cool because what that does is tells me I need to just add 5 to 10 pounds and I need to beat that total tonnage. And so it gives you a marker at the top of your screen to beat every week. And so now I know if I just lift a little bit heavier or I lift 1 extra rep on each set, I'm going to get an amount of tonnage, a total tonnage for this exercise this week that is going to guarantee I am growing in that body part. And if we're doing that with the body parts we specialize in, we are going to guarantee growth. So ultimately what this comes down to is really simple. Again, if you want to build a stubborn muscle group or body part and you want to build or develop a specialization program, you need to 1, train it often, so increase the frequency. You need to 2, train it differently, so change the movement pattern or the joint angle and the machine, the loading, the resistance curve. Just train it differently. Use a different exercise each week or each time you hit that muscle. You're going to train it first, so you're going to start your sessions with that body part to make sure that you're emphasizing the muscle group when you have the most energy in that day and in that session. And then lastly, you're going to train it most, meaning you're going to do more volume with that specific body part than any other body part or muscle group on your body. And so if you follow those 4 steps, I guarantee you are going to develop stubborn body parts. I hope you liked this episode of the podcast. If you are on Spotify or Apple, please do me a favor and leave us a 5-star rating and review. And make sure you send this to a friend who has a clearly weak and lagging muscle group that they need to develop. And if you're on YouTube, leave a comment if you have any questions, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I will catch you guys next time.